Hey guys, how's it going? Um, in this page, we're going to talk about sound and rhyme in poetry, and then how sound and rhyme can create meaning. So we talked about how patterns appear visually, and then we also talked about poetic line, and we talked about how the variation in patterns create meaning. We haven't talked about sound, which is really important in poetry in a way that maybe is less important in prose. That would be like novels, that sort of thing. Um, so rhyme would be, right, sound is, how it sounds. Rhyme would be like when two words sound similar and there's a play on the way that they're pronounced, right? Rhyming has been forever important in poetry. We talked way back about sonnets, and one of the components of a sonnet is that it includes set rhyme scheme where each line has to be a certain number of syllables. It has to be a certain number of lines, and it has to follow a certain rhyme scheme. So you can imagine that'd be very difficult to write a sonnet because you have to follow all these rules. The example on the page is a good example of the rhyme scheme. So when certain words rhyme together, they get the same letter. So the word by rhymes with I, and so they're both get the letter A to symbolize that those two lines rhyme together. Okay, we don't need to worry so much about rhyme scheme for like following traditional structures because the poets that we're looking at don't really do that. The new Colossus is an example of a sonnet, so it does follow a rhyme scheme. If you're gonna talk about that poem in your essay, then you'll definitely want to talk about the rhyme scheme. But the rest of the poems that we look at, they have rhyme, but they're not following a scheme in the most traditional sense. Even like the Langston Hughes poem, it starts with a very familiar rhyme scheme, and then it breaks away from that. So there's a big variation towards the end. So yeah, pay attention to the way that rhyme is used in the poem. There's different types of rhyme. Perfect rhyme is like spot on cat hat. That would be an example of a perfect rhyme. A forced rhyme is when it's like, that doesn't really rhyme, right? You hear a lot of that in rap, where a rapper is trying to make two things rhyme that doesn't really work. And so some of the words have to be pronounced differently in order to make that rhyme happen. Or they rely on the beat to make a rhyme happen when a rhyme doesn't really necessarily exist. A slant rhyme is a rhyme that kind of works. So the example they give is found kind. Like, that's not really a rhyme, but kind of, right? Like, it's a slant rhyme. The masculine rhyme and feminine rhyme just have to do with like where or how the word rhymes specifically. A visual rhyme is a rhyme that, or a word that looks like it should rhyme, but it doesn't. So the example they give is slaughter and laughter, right? It looks like they should rhyme because slaughter contains the word laughter, but they don't rhyme at all. The other thing that you want to look at is internal rhyme. Most often rhymes take place at the end of a sentence, right? So, or the end of a line. So one line will end with a word and then the next line will rhyme with it, or a couple lines down it will have that rhyme. Sometimes the rhyme takes place within the same line. So look at the example on the page there of that. Other ways that sound comes into play in poetry is assonance, and that's the repetition of vowel sounds. Consonance is the repetition of stressed syllables. It's pretty rare to come across that. And then alliteration is the repetition of consonants at the beginning of a word. So they use the example, they provide an example there where all the words begin with L. That's an example of alliteration. So assonance and alliteration are mostly the ones that you would be looking for when it comes to the use of sound. So rhyme and sound is just as important as the patterns that they create are just as important as visual patterns, the structure of the poem. And so when you are looking at or analyzing a poem, you want to pay attention to how sound is at play, just as much as you want to focus on visual patterns or poetic line or that sort of thing. And these are all things that you can focus on when you're unpacking a poem to determine the underlying meaning. Okay, let me know if you have any questions.